Welcome to Thinkplus Education to day 8 of our 60-day series to CAT. In today's session, we're going to deal with CAT 2022 Slot 1 RC. Before you watch the rest of the video, click on the PDF or link below, solve the questions, and then come back. Let's begin. We'll start with reading the RC. We'll quickly make notes, and then we'll go to the questions and see if we can answer them with what we remember or not. Please follow my style of making notes. If it is helpful for you, that will be wonderful. All right, let's dive right into it. The Chinese have two different concepts of a copy. Very introductory, explanatory. Fang Zipin are imitations where the difference from the original is obvious. So they have two types of copy. Copy here is imitation, mimics. One is imitations where the difference from the original is obvious. These are small models or copies that can be purchased in a museum shop. For example, the second concept, the second concept for a copy is Fuzipin. They are exact reproductions of the original, which for the Chinese are of equal value to the original. It has absolutely no negative connotations. So what that tells us is that the Chinese have two versions of a copy. One copy is a miniaturized replica of it, and that seems to have lesser value. And the other is an exact replication of the original, and that has equal value. No wonder Chinese are known for their fake products. Let's have a look at it. The discrepancy with regard to the understanding of what a copy is has often led to misunderstandings and arguments between China and Western museums. The Chinese often send copies abroad instead of originals in the firm belief that they are not essentially different from the originals. The rejection that then comes from the Western museums is perceived by the Chinese as an insult. So what is this paragraph primarily telling us? It is primarily, or at least according to the author is trying to emphasize on this. In China, copy has one variation, two variation, exact replica, and the other is miniaturized. I mean, for the sake of classification, miniaturized. One is equal in value, two isn't. And this is against Western understanding of copy. All right, so that gives me a sense of what happened in the first paragraph. The author is trying to talk about the different versions of copy and how the West understands it versus how the Chinese understand it. So let's look at the second paragraph. The Far Eastern notion of identity is also very confusing to the Western observer. The Ise Grand Shrine is 1300 years old for the millions of Japanese people who go there on pilgrimage every year. But in reality, this temple complex is completely rebuilt from scratch every 20 years. Oh, so again, same in Japan. He talks about identity, conflict, cultures. I am writing that down as a cultural conflict. So the other details are not really important to remember, but let's just remember this part. All right. The next paragraph. The Cathedral of Freiburg Minster in southwest Germany is covered in scaffolding almost all year round. Scaffolding is a support structure around a building. The sandstone from which it is built is a very soft porous material that does not withstand natural erosion by rain and wind. So cool, this cathedral is built with sandstone and that is not very sturdy. After a while, it crumbles, it breaks down. As a result, the cathedral is continually being examined for damage and eroded stones are replaced. So this cathedral, the stones are getting eroded as with time and then they're replaced. And in the cathedral's dedicated workshop, copies of the damaged sandstone figures are constantly being produced. So copies are being made. Of course, attempts are made to preserve the stones from the Middle Ages for as long as possible, but at some point, they too are removed and replaced with new stones. Now, in this particular paragraph, of course, he talks about West versus East and Oriental versus whatever. In the third paragraph, he's taking the example of he's taking a Western example. And says, at some point, it becomes new. It is completely new. If you look at this, all the way to here, the author has been discussing about how the East looks at copies, how the West looks at copies, and then he brings about the cathedral as an example and says, well, even in Germany, that is the Western world, there is one example of a cathedral which is being completely rebuilt over time. So, would that be a copy or is it the original? I think that is a question that the author is going to ask in the next paragraph as well. So, let's move to the next paragraph. All right. Fundamentally, this is the same operation as with the Japanese shrine. So he draws parallel. He draws parallel between the Japan example and the German example. But to do what? Except in this case, the production of a replica takes place over, very slowly and over long periods of time in the field of art as well. And then he moves on to another example in the field of art as well. The idea of an unassailable original developed historically in the Western world. Back in the 17th century, excavated artworks from antiquity were treated quite differently from today. They were not restored in a way that was faithful to the original. And he says, well, before 17th century, the West thought similar to the East. It was only after 17th century that I think, things changed. And this particular example is from the perspective of art. Earlier, we were not talking about art. We were talking about anything in general, antiquity. But here, in the perspective of art. Now, if you look at it, the reason why the author is talking about this is, if I would ask you the question, is the author in support of the Japanese or the Chinese or the Eastern idea of what a real thing is and what a copy is, and is the author more closer towards the Eastern thought process or Western thought process? The answer should be the author is tending towards the Eastern thought process, because that is what he's trying to emphasize. So let's complete. They were not restored in a way that was faithful to the original. Instead, there was a massive intervention in these works, changing their appearance. All of that is because of this in the 17th century. All right, let's go to the last paragraph. It is probably this intellectual position. I'd always emphasize on you looking at these words, probably. The author is saying probably because the author is not sure. This might turn out to be valuable later on. It is probably this intellectual position that explains why Asians have far fewer scruples. Scruples are conservative. They have far lesser problems with that issue, far lesser issues with this. So they have far lesser scruples. They have far lesser problems about cloning. There are no principles that has been compromised. So they have far fewer scruples about cloning than Europeans. The South Korean cloning researcher Hwang Woo-suk, who attracted worldwide attention with his cloning experiments in 2004, is a Buddhist. Out here, he's probably drawing everything up here was about, the Eastern thought and the Western thought are different, and then, the whole understanding of what a copy is and what a copy is not is very different. And then probably the author is tracing it back to the reason as to why. Why is it that it is the way it is? He found a great deal of support and followers among Buddhists, while Christians called for a ban on human cloning. So maybe maybe the reason is religion. And every religion has its own thought process, so maybe that. I am Buddhist, and I have no philosophical problem with cloning. And as you know, the basis of Buddhism is that life is recycled through incarnation, reincarnation. In some ways, I think therapeutic cloning restarts the circle of life. So maybe religion. I think that's fundamentally everything that is there in this paragraph. So net, if I have to summarize the whole passage, what I would say is, well, the author started off saying that the Chinese have a different perspective on what a copy is versus the Western. For the Chinese, anything which is an exact replica is as good as the original, but for the Western people, that doesn't seem so. But the Western thought was also not the same. Before 17th century, or during and before 17th century, the West also, well, pretty much aligned with what the Eastern thought is. And from there, he goes on to talk about a certain set of examples as to how that happened, draws parallels, and towards the end, he says maybe this difference is primarily because, well, there is religious difference. Maybe that is what is the reason. So the author is in many ways trying to, one, draw our attention to this issue, or, well, not an issue, but this observation. And then the author is also trying to analyze, okay, what could be the reason? So he's not really arguing, he's not really asserting anything, but he's still exploring, he's wondering. So this is possibly the author's purpose. So let's dive into the questions now. I hope you solve the questions. Please stay back and verify your answers with me. Here are the questions. Question number 1. Based on the passage, which one of the following copies would a Chinese museum be unlikely to consider as having less value than the original? So let's work backwards. To consider as having less value than original. Unlikely to have considered, or unlikely to consider as having less value than the original. So let's have a look at the options. And what is it that we are expecting here? We are expecting to identify one which says it is as good as the original, or it is the original, it is in the same value as the original. So let's have a look at the options. Pablo Picasso's painting of Vincent van Gogh's original painting identical in every respect. I would say this is, according to the Chinese people, a replication of the original is as good. You know, the Fang Zipin and the Fu Zipin. Here, it seems to be that the Chinese people would happily accept any exact replica. So Pablo Picasso has painted Vincent van Gogh's original painting exactly. So this is most probably the answer, and that is what we'll check. B. Pablo Picasso's photograph of Vincent van Gogh's original painting. Now this is not a reproduction. This is just a copy. Of course, it's not being done again. It's a photograph. But in the first one, Pablo Picasso actually painted it. So, well, in the first option, you remade it. In the second option, you just captured it. You've not remade it. So I don't think the Chinese would be very happy with that. Pablo Picasso's miniaturized. This is the first kind of copy, which was lesser in value. And D. Pablo Picasso's painting of Vincent van Gogh's original painting bearing Picasso's signature. This changes everything. If Vincent van Gogh's original painting had Vincent van Gogh's signature, the moment you have Picasso's signature on it, it is of no value whatsoever. And hence, the answer has to be Alfred. A. Let's dive into the second question, which is now the following statements does not correctly express the similarity between the Isegrand Shrine and the Cathedral of Freiburg Minster. So does not correctly express. This is what we are looking for. Does not correctly express. What that means is there are three options that express it correctly and one option that does not. Both can be regarded as very old structures. For the Japanese, the Grand Shrine is very old and the Cathedral Freiburg is anyway old, whatever the contradictions are. So that is a similarity. Both will one day be completely rebuilt. Well, the cathedral is being rebuilt over a long time. The Grand Ise Shrine is being built or rebuilt every 20 years. See, both were built as places of worship, of course. Well, That's the idea. Both are continually undergoing restoration. I would disagree with that. Are both continually undergoing restoration? No, no, no. The cathedral is undergoing restoration, but the Grand Ise Shrine is completely being rebuilt. So there is no restoration. It is only rebuilt. So both are not undergoing restoration. Only one of them is, and hence the answer is Delhi. Question number 3. Which one of the following scenarios is unlikely to follow from the argument in the passage? Unlikely to follow. So one of these is not likely to follow. So it does not agree with the passage is what it is. Option A. A 17th century British painter. Now, the moment I say 17th century, these are the people who had no scruples about messing with the original. So let's see. Would have no problem adding personal touches when restoring an ancient Roman painting. Would have no scruples, would have no problem adding personal touches. 17th century, that is the point. 17th century. Had it been a Western guy from today's world, he would have problems with this. So Ahmedabad, Alfred, follows from the passage. Bombay, a 20th century Japanese Buddhist monk would value a reconstructed shrine as the original. Well, the Grand Ise Shrine is the example of it. It follows, absolutely follows. That is what we answered earlier. See, a 17th century French artist who adhered to a Christian worldview would need to be completely true. Absolutely not. I think that's it, right? Regardless of whether he adhered to the Christian worldview or not, he is or of belonging to the 17th century. And Western thought back in 17th century was talking about, well, I don't have to, stick to the original. I can mess it up. And this does not follow. So unlikely to follow. You see this, unlikely to follow. This does not follow, and hence the answer is C. I don't even want to look at Delhi, but let's have a look at it. A 21st century Christian scientist is likely to oppose cloning. And that's exactly what it is, right? They have more scruples, and hence it is more likely. More likely. He's not saying absolutely not. It's just saying likely. So he's going to have more scruples about it. Sure. And the last question, the value that the modern West assigns to an unassailable original. Unassailable. Assailable. Assail is to attack. Something that cannot be attacked, an unassailable original, has resulted in all of the following except. So the Western thought that there is an original that cannot be attacked. It is the thing. It cannot change. And from this perspective or this thought process, which of the following is true? Well, it says except. So there are 3 except. Of the 4 options, there are 3 that come from this, and there is 1 which does not come from this. So let's have a look at it. So according to this, an unassailable original, I cannot replicate it. Anything that is replicated is of no use. And well, there's this sacrosanct thing there. So let's see. It discourages them from making intervention in ancient art. True. They don't want to mess with it. B, it discourages them from carrying out human cloning. Well, maybe, yes. It discourages them, sure, yes. But we'll come back to this because is it they don't want to do it? They are not allowed to do it? We'll have a look at it. It discourages them from simultaneous displays of multiple copies of a painting. Absolutely, yes. There is one painting, the original painting, and it is what it is. It cannot be attacked, and hence it is. They wouldn't do it. They wouldn't put multiple copies of it. And D, it allows regular employment for certain craftsmen. Now, I would agree with that. It allows regular employment for certain craftsmen. Look at the Freiburg Minster. The sandstone crumbles and then they replace it. Well, sure, that is one way. And the other way of looking at it is if I'm a painter or if I'm an artist, I create an original. If nobody is copying it and someone else wants another artwork from me, an original, I am still in the game. So I have that employment regularity. So that can be inferred, sure. Now, the only problem I have with Bombay is this, it discourages them from carrying out human cloning. They have more scruples than a Buddhist or a Eastern scientist. They have more scruples, but would they not do it? Do I know that? Does the passage tell that to me? No. The passage only says that, hey, the Eastern people have lesser scruples than the Western people, but the Western people also obviously did cloning. So it's not discouraging them from carrying out cloning. It's only giving them, I don't know, bad dreams at night, possibly. So the answer is Bombay. And hence, I hope you got all the answers right. That is the end of today's session. If you have any queries, please drop down into the comment box, give or share your questions with me. And there is one more question in the PDF, so solve that as well. I will catch you again very soon. Thank you, bye-bye, and all the very best. Adios.